So common knowledge says if a car has an electric propulsion system, it's gotta look different. It's gotta look like a spaceship. But let's say you're a car designer. What do you do in cases where the car being electrified is anything but conventional or normal? And that is precisely the opportunity to become the contrarian investor, at least in car design, and go towards the direction of conventional, normal. But of course, you gotta add a little flair. So let's start with the obvious question. What exactly is this thing? Because it looks a hell of a lot like a Rolls Royce Wraith, but then again, it doesn't. It looks like it's gone back to the design studio and become a show car again. This one perhaps a bit bigger, but we'll discuss more of that later. In reality, it's the first ever Rolls Royce with a fully electric propulsion system that is a road car, meaning not an experimental, not a show car. A lot of asterisks there. Now, let's get the EV bits out of the way because there is more going on here than this just being an electric car. So yes, it is a dual motor electric vehicle. This one's rather unusual in that you expect a lot of power from a Rolls Royce, but here you have more than double the horsepower and torque in the rear motor that does impact the propulsion system, at least the way it drives. Then there's the battery, and here you would expect the Rolls Royce being an outsized personality. The battery is also an outsized personality, 102 kilowatt hours. But there we have some troubles because did I mention this is a Rolls Royce, meaning it's not small, it's not light, so that impacts the range. The US government calls this for 266 miles of range on a full charge. The charging is quick, but not the fastest we've ever seen. Like for example, to go from 10 to 80% on a DC fast charger, 195 kilowatts, it's about 34 minutes. To charge it fully, it would be over 5 hours. Putting aside energy storage, anything with over 660 pounds of torque and almost 600 total system horsepower, you would hope it would be quick. Rollers of the past, they've been quick even though they've been big and heavy. This, no exception to that. 0 to 60, 4.4 seconds. VMAX electronically limited to 155 miles an hour. Now before you and I jump behind the wheel, a favor. If you see value in these episodes, we would greatly appreciate you doing all the YouTube things. Subscribe, notifications, like, leave a comment, but most importantly, share these episodes with your friends on all your socials. Why? The YouTube algorithm, a complete bitch. Now with that, this, it may be electric, but it still has a Le Mans start. Correct me if I'm wrong, but no one on planet Earth would equate Rolls-Royce with lightweight. However, this takes that concept to a completely different universe. 6,371 pounds, or depending on expressive weights and measures, 2,890 kilograms. Put another way, that is about 1,000 pounds more than any other Rolls-Royce coupe you and I have recently driven. But let's dispense with the pleasantries. Oh yes. Oh yes. So this, it's not so much a case of it being fast. It is. This is a case of the promise of instantaneous torque. Now, how does it feel where the rubber meets the road? And it's here you notice the difference between the front and rear motors. Yes, this is all-wheel drive, but the majority of the time, it's the rear motor that's doing most of the work. So when you drop the hammer on the accelerator, it picks up the front, kind of old world. Then there's something that completely hits you across the face as soon as you get behind the wheel. Listen to it. That sounds like a Rolls Royce. Even internal combustion engine Rolls Royces, they were unusually quiet, even going back to like the versions from the 50s. Putting that aside, they did engineer in some imperfection from previous Rolls Royces. So hopefully we can do this without going off the road. We go into drive settings here, and they have a Rolls Royce sound. Let's switch it on here, and let's drop the hammer. It doesn't sound like an internal combustion engine. It's not trying to sound like an internal combustion engine. But more interestingly, it's not trying to sound like a spaceship. You know, like the Taycan sound they put into that car? That's the first one when we heard these like sound profiles in electric cars. That it's like Star Wars. It's gimmicky, it's stupid. Which brings you to a point of reflecting on the purpose, at least the inside and power delivery of Rolls Royces of the past. The whole idea is to separate you from the elements, separate you from the plebes of the world, and put you in like sort of like a club environment, a private club like they have in certain parts of London that are calm amongst the craziness of a city. That's what this noise is trying to recreate. Right about now, I feel compelled to share something that had been bothering me about the Spectre from the first time I saw it, whether it's pictures or video. Thinking to myself, that is an electric Wraith. Not a bad thing, beautiful car. Why not just call it an electric Wraith? And then you speak to the people at Rolls-Royce, like the business people and the engineering people behind it, and they will all tell you the same thing. They will say, this is the spiritual successor to the Phantom Coupe. And I'm like, guys, that is not a Phantom Coupe. It's not as big. It's not as like stately. The presence is different. It's a Wraith, which was a good thing. Why not go with it? Apparently, they weren't wrong, because if you look at these things from dimensions, you see it when they're side to side. This car actually is smaller. This feels smaller to drive. I know that's hard to believe, being that it's been based on a Ghost platform. This is still a big car. This is bigger. I'll prove it to you. The wheelbase on this is 4 inches shorter than this. The length on this is 5 inches shorter than this. But what about the other direction? Is this the same length and wheelbase as a Phantom Coupe? Well, it's exactly the same number difference, just in the opposite direction. So the wheelbase is 4 inches longer there, and the overall length is 5 inches longer. Then you look at the wheels. These biggest wheels ever fitted to any Rolls-Royce, including a Cullinan, 23 inches on a coupe. In comparison, 21 inches, they look like the 14-inch wheels that I had on my Pontiac Fiero way back when I went to Arizona State University. Now allow me a little latitude to get pedantic here. This, a 2015 model year Wraith, was based on the then current Ghost. And for those of you that didn't get the memo, this was just a Ghost coupe, although far more attractive than the Ghost sedan around the same time. That, a 2024 model year, is based on the current Ghost, at least bits of it. The architecture they call the architecture of luxury. Of course they had to go with that name. Putting the crazy terminology aside, what they've done is they've taken the 4 corners and changed it or adapted it to be an electric vehicle. They brought some of the bits over that work, like the 4-wheel steering, but they changed things to really take into account the extra weight and size of the vehicle. Like, for example, the double wishbone, they've gotten rid of the upper wishbone damper. A bit later in this episode, we'll get to why that's important, but now a preview. We had an unusual opportunity to get 2 very special cars side by side, so we took the opportunity to shoot a second episode. You see, there is so much going on here, way beyond all the EV propulsion stuff, that we needed to kind of do one of these geeky, techie episodes where we do a tech review between this and this. Not necessarily talking about this as a Wraith EV, but how this is different from other Rolls-Royce coupes. Look for that episode coming in the next couple of weeks. So let's get something out of the way right at the top. This is not an experience about driving dynamics, trying to push a car aggressively, or even driving it slow. This is an experience of wearing a car, much like we experienced in a Dawn or the other end of a spectrum, a Dodge Challenger. Let's understand exactly what this experience is. It's not too soft and it's not too hard. In other words, you're not going to aggressively go around corners, but if you do, you're not going to find yourself off into the side, into that fence there. How they do that is far more fascinating. So you know when we talk about like Toyota Tacomas, and they have sway bars, anti-roll bars that can be disconnected, that's useful when you're doing off-road. This has effectively the same technology. The anti-roll bars can be disconnected so each side of the car can act independently and thus deliver the balance between compliance and composure. It just puts you in a different mood. I think the best way to describe it is you go into like a boutique hotel and they have those like lounges in the lobby with the chill music. That's the feel here. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the options game with today's contestant, something that could correctly be referred to as the first ever fully electric Rolls Royce, but really more authentically, the Phantom Coupe or Coupe to Wraith tweener that happens to be propelled by electrons. As you could imagine, this ain't cheap, but this is where it's more Phantom Coupe than it was Wraith, because that Wraith we had in the episode, I think new that one was like $360,000 US the way it's at. This, the base price, $420,000. Now, as you can imagine, we cannot go through every option because this one is a custom-built car. We can laugh about options in Porsches and these kind of cars, but in reality, one buys a car like this because they want to make it their own. Like the idea of walking into a Rolls Royce dealer and saying, I'll take that one, foolish, because why not make it something like a sort of bluish purple Rolls Royce coupe with wagon wheel wheels if you want that. So in this case, there are 22 options that total $105,000. I gave back a Range Rover Velar to get this, and just the options are $25,000 more. With that, the first option we have to talk about is a package to dress up the interior. So a bespoke interior where you can pick out all the different points, 19 different points you can customize for $9,800. And then you know how I talk about like an analog clock in an AMG. They do the IWC, but it's digital. Okay, lovely, but come on, man, we're putting 150 grand and above for a car like that. I want the real IWC thing. So like, I'm buying an IWC watch, I just happen to get a car for free. Now, a point of order, the car does come fitted with an analog clock as standard. This just happens to be the more special bespoke clock for $4,725. You know the old saying, if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. So if we're gonna spend almost $5 grand for a clock, why don't we spend $1,400 for special VIN plates that sit below the door sill, excuse me, not door sills in a Rolls Royce, tread plates if you want them finished as they are here, $3,700. Then these cars are famous for having umbrellas in the doors. Basically, they go into the fender. If you want them special to match the color of this car, an additional $1,775. Then, of course, this has to have the fancy stereo system. Why that's optional on a $420,000 car, I have no idea, but you're going to pay an additional $11,425. Now, this being a British car, of course, one has to have contrast stitch and a contrast color for the piping. Those two separate options together are about $7,500 US. You can kind of see where we're going here. For a lot of extra budget and a good amount of imagination, one can make this their own. The only thing we have to pay extra for is the destination handling from Goodwood, England, for $2,725. And for the avoidance of doubt, Rolls-Royce has been manufacturing cars there for only 20 years. Now, BMW, that's when they moved production from where Bentleys are made today to where Rolls-Royces are made in Goodwood. And so putting it all together, $523,525. Okay, something fascinating about this whole experience. One goes into it with a lot of expectations. First ever fully electric Rolls Royce, and you're expecting things to change. That's the thing that I find most fascinating about this experience. Nothing changes, at least the way you interact with the experience. All the switchgear is exactly what Rolls-Royce has been doing for years. You have chunky knobs, you have the exact same HVAC setup, you have the organ stop here where you can turn on and off the vents. Yeah, it's got the screen which the kids all want these days, but it's the same size screen. They're not saying, oh, it's an EV, we're trying to appeal to a different customer, so we have to have a bigger screen. In other words, there's nothing groundbreaking in here. Yeah, they updated some details. Like, for example, you can do the Starlight headliner on the doors now. Not that I would want it, I prefer the wood, but the point here is it's exactly what you'd expect from a car manufacturer that's been building cars for over 100 years.
Sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder.
So what have you and I learned today? Well, here I got to bring up something the folks at Rolls-Royce never like me discussing on camera, and that is their parent company. You and I have driven practically every BMW EV out there, at least on sale in the US. And we've learned that BMW, very late to the party, they have kind of reinvented the electric car. They are truly BMW's first and then an electric car. Like, for example, the BMW i4, actually the cheap one, the eDrive, that is one of the best driving EVs out there, full stop, because you can steer it with your right foot, kind of like BMWs have been for all their lives. That logic has been applied to this. This is a Rolls-Royce first, and then it's electric. I was kind of nervous going into this, thinking they would try to get gimmicky and do stupid things. Yeah, some of the sounds on the inside, the chimes change to make it more modern for the kids that will buy this thing. But the reality is, the Rolls-Royce, at least the ride quality, the presence, that's all intact. The only thing the EV thing adds is the sound difference and obviously capitulating to government mandates. And this is where we have to get to the wish list. Rolls-Royce has very loudly said they're going fully electric by 2030. Everything will be fully electric, not plug-in hybrid, not hybrid, nothing like that, fully electric. And I get where you're going. You're based in Europe, you're owned by a German car manufacturer, and you got the EU breathing down your neck. That probably not a prudent decision. Matter of fact, AMG, they kind of stepped back their whole, we're going full electric by like 2030 or something like that, and they've gone to, let's see what the market decides. I would argue Rolls-Royce and BMW need to adopt the same philosophy, because these cars, they're not really bought by the kind of people that need to have an EV or need the newest technology. What they need it to be is a Rolls-Royce. So kudos to the folks at the BMW Group for being smart enough to make this thing what it is. Let's just be smart enough to realize reality is going to change some of these government mandates, at least push them farther out. So let's allow for a product plan that will change with the times. I am one man. This is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found this episode fascinating, I would highly suggest you watch our first episode for this season, and that was the 2024 Porsche 911 ST, another very special, very rare car, different than this, but still very bespoke. You can check that episode out here. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.